All right, P5, last one before we test over P1 to P5. That is on Friday. Beautiful Friday. We'll just take a little test. But for the most part, you should be in good shape. I would think so. Forget today is picture day, so smile pretty. Okay. Or handsomely for the gentleman. We'll be in P5 today and tomorrow. Today is basically your special types of factors and then just regular factoring. When we first start, the first thing you always want to look for is going to be factoring out a GCF or a greatest common factor. So remember, whenever we deal with a greatest common factor, we are, that help? When we do a greatest common factor, we're looking for what value we can take out of each coefficient and then what we can take out of each variable. So if we have 18x to the third plus 27x squared, what's the highest value we can take out of the coefficient, or we can divide by each coefficient? 9? 9, and then x to the second. So if we take out 9x to the second, then it's really just whatever's left. If we don't factor out a negative, that sign's going to stay, so it's going to be a plus in the middle. And then really we're just looking at what did we factor out, or what can we divide, or whenever we divide 18x to the third by 9x squared, what do we have left? Well, we have 2x and then just 3, right? Because the x squared and the x squared is gone. Now on 2, okay, it's already factored. Okay, it's basically how we're going to set up whenever we do factor by grouping. And seemingly from after being here for a year, factor by grouping is a big thing for students to do, which is completely fine. But what's in each part? The x minus 7, right? So whenever I do this, I'm going to have x minus 7 times 2x plus 3. Whatever's left on the outside goes together, and then the one parenthesis of the x minus 7 is its own parenthesis there. So whenever we do factor by grouping, okay, and like I said, factor by grouping is, I feel like, really big here. That what you've been taught is to really try to get it to where there's 4 terms, because you can do factor by grouping so much easier. You want to do factor by grouping if you have 4 terms. If you have 3, you can get it there. If you have a trinomial, you can make it into a 4-term problem. If you automatically have 4, that's the first thing I would look at. So if it's the first thing that I'm going to look at, what I'm going to do is look at the first 2 terms. So of x to the third plus 5x squared, what can I factor out of both parts? X squared. So I have x squared, and then I have x plus 5. Now, whatever I put in the parenthesis, I'm going to want to rewrite that parenthesis again and kind of leave myself a little bit of space and go x plus 5, and then look at it individually as far as what's circled, what's negative 2x, or what's negative 10, okay, divided by that 5. Okay, or what's the negative 2x divided by that x? What multiplied by x plus 5 is going to give me negative 2x minus 10? Negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times a positive 5 is a negative 10. Then we treat it the same way we just did. Since x plus 5 is what got repeated, I'm going to have x plus 5 in one parenthesis, And then whatever's left over on the outside is going to go together. The two become one. It's like a love story. Now, whenever you factor a trinomial, this is one of those things that is completely up to you. Okay? I've taught this a lot of different ways. Okay? The biggest thing, and it probably should be the first thing, is at the very end. That you always want to check to see if you can factor out a GCF first. Okay? This part down here should be probably the first thing that is down here in bold. Okay? That should probably be the first thing, is to always check a GCF first. It's going to make your problem so much easier if you factor out a greatest common factor before you even start, if that's possible. From there, you can do guess and check. Okay, if you can do it in your head quickly. The biggest one that I've found from, especially from last year, is what I call the Xbox method. Okay, where students basically, you'll draw the X here, and on the top side you go whatever A is times whatever C is. On the bottom side you're going to put whatever your B is, so whatever that middle term is. So whenever you multiply your first and your last coefficient, or your constant at the end, you're going to get a value. That value has to add or subtract, or you have to combine it to get your B value, or your middle value that's in your trinomial. Okay? And then all we're really going to do with those two numbers, that we put those on each side. In some cases, one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. In some cases, they're both going to be positive, or they're both going to be negative. Okay? And then we just write it as 4 terms. Okay? Whenever we write it as 4 terms, then we use factor by grouping, and we go from there. This isn't something you have to do. This is just something I feel like that you've probably been taught a lot more, and to put it this way, which is completely fine. Okay? Alright, so if we look at 7, so what can we factor out? This one's a little bit different than the other 3, because we have an x to the 4th, an x to the 2nd, and then a constant. So it's not going to be as cut and dry as x squared plus 6x plus 8. Now, you treat these the same way. Alright, so if you have an x to the 4th, if it's not an odd power, and it's an even power, you're going to treat it just like if it would have been x to the 6th, and then an x to the 3rd, or an x to the 8th, and an x to the 4th. Okay? Whatever that middle term is, as long as this value right here is half, if that 2 is half of your 4, you're going to be in good shape, and you can do everything the same way as if it was an x squared. So don't treat it any differently. So do you want to use guess and check? Do you want to do the x and go with grouping? How do you want to go about this? Alright, so if we x this out, what is A times C? Now, that negative is also included. So it's going to be a negative 24. My middle term has to be a negative 10. So then two numbers that can multiply to give me a negative 24 and combine to give me a negative 10. Baby. Okay, 4 and 6 works, but what's the problem? That doesn't work, right? Why doesn't 4 and 6 work?
Because there's no way to factor out of 4 and 6. There's like no 4 and 6 in there.
Okay.
Negative 12 and positive 2.
Negative 12 and positive 2. Okay, so negative 12 and a positive 2. Remember, I had to have signs that were different because of that negative 24. Okay, because that middle term is negative, I have to have two values that are opposite of one another. And then because it's a negative 10, the bigger of the two numbers, so between the 12 and the 2, the bigger of the two numbers needs to be negative. So then whenever I rewrite this, the front and the back, so the 8x to the 4th doesn't change, and the negative 3 doesn't change. All I'm going to do is take these two terms and go negative 12x squared plus 2x squared. So then, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. What can I factor out of 8x to the 4th minus 12x squared? What coefficient can I factor out? 4x to the 2nd. What am I left with? 2x to the 2nd minus 3. Woo! Look at this. Oh, not third. So remember, whatever's in that parenthesis needs to match. So what's going to go in that gap between the two? Plus 1. So then whenever I write this out as solving it, you'll write it below. I don't have the space. So I'm going to have 4x squared plus 1 times 2x squared minus 3. Sorry, I ran out of room. Same way here. You treat everything the same way. Even if you have two variables, it doesn't change your approach. Okay? It's just looking at it a different way. So if you have 2x squared minus 7x plus 3y squared, everything's going to be the same. You're still going to do all the steps. It's not going to change. If you're going to go here, you're still going to take positive 2. You're still going to take 2 times 3 and get 6. Okay, and then you're still going to have negative 7 down on the bottom side, and you still need to find two values. Okay, you still need to find two values that are going to multiply together to give you a positive 6 and combine to give you a negative 7. Okay, so your only option here is going to be a negative 6 and a negative 1. So we're still just rewriting. Remember, the front part and the last part don't change. So it's still going to be 2x squared. It's still going to be plus 3y squared. But the negative 7xy changes. So then it's just going to be negative 6xy minus 1xy. We still factor it by grouping, so we still look at the first two terms, and we still go from there. Nothing changes. Okay, just because you have two variables versus one, I'm still going to look here and figure out what can I factor out. Okay, I can factor out a 2x, and then what am I left with? Well, I'm left with x minus 3y. Remember, x minus 3y should be now in the back parenthesis. And then it's just, what do I need to fill in the middle? Okay, so in the middle it's just going to be a negative y. But nothing, the approach doesn't change, just the problem does. So 2x minus y, x minus 3y, happy little yellow clouds. With your special cases, here's your special case. If you have two terms, then the first thing you want to do is see, is it a difference of two squares, or is it a sum or a difference of two cubes? Now, notice there is no such thing as a sum of two squares. Okay, so if you have a perfect square and a perfect square, and there's only two of them, it better be a subtraction sign. And it's really as simple, just like we did with the conjugates, because that's what it's going to factor out to be, are two conjugates of one another. That it's whatever number, it's a perfect square in the first, or the square root of whatever your first term is, and the square root of whatever your second term is. Now, sum of difference of two cubes is a little bit different. Okay? Notice that the signs are always going to be the same as far as the first part, and then it's the opposite sign in the trinomial that is going to be different. So if it's a plus, if it's a sum, then in that trinomial, that middle term should always be a negative. If it's a minus, then that middle term of the trinomial is going to be a positive. So I'm not going to go here. I'm going to go ahead and just go to the trinomial, or the cubes. Maybe. Alright, so let's look at 14, because 13 is a little basic. So on 14 I have 125x to the third minus 8. So it is a difference of two cubes. Alright, so it's a cube. So I'm looking for basically the formula of whatever. I'm going to have a minus b. Then it's going to be a squared plus ab plus b squared. So what's the cube root of 125x to the third? Or look at it this way. What's the cube root of 125? What number times itself 3 times gives you 125? 5. So first term, or a, is 5x minus what number times itself gives you 8? 3 times. 2. Once you get to this point, you are done essentially with this part. You're only going to look at these two values. So, what's 5x squared? Bless you. What's 5x squared? 25x squared. Now multiply. What's 5x times negative 2? Negative 10, or excuse me, 5x, so it's going to be a plus, so it's going to be plus 10x, because the middle term has to be positive. And then what is 2 squared? Plus 4. So I'm going to rewrite this. So whenever I factor it out, 5x minus 2 times 25x squared plus 10x plus 4. Alright, your assignment is on page 68. You're going to do every other odd. So basically you have all the problems there. You only have like 15 or 16 problems. I kept it pretty short. But if you're going to do it off the book, I think we have the internet taken care of now in here. So if you want to do digitally, you should be able to. They put it in a new drop, so that seemingly has helped.